My toxic stepsister took everything from me, but now I'm engaged. Reddit story. Welcome to Silent Wars. In today's video, we're diving into an incredible Reddit story that is sure to leave you speechless. It's a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and finding the strength to move forward. If you're a fan of compelling stories and real-life drama, you've come to the right place. Before we start, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel, Silent Wars, so you never miss another gripping Reddit story. Growing up, I never had the traditional family experience that most kids seem to have. My parents divorced when I was just 2 years old, and my father quickly disappeared from our lives. He paid child support, but that was the extent of his involvement. He never checked in on me or showed any real concern for my well-being. To be honest, I don't even remember him being there for any significant moments in my life. He abandoned us without looking back, and I was left to deal with my mother's indifference. My mother, who was only 48 when all of this began, wasn't much of a mother either. In my early years, she was more concerned with her social life than with raising me. She was always out, either spending time with friends or going on dates. I was basically raised by nannies and babysitters, and when I got older, I started to notice how little time she actually spent with me. She was a freelance artist who made a good living each month, but the reality was that she didn't have to worry much about me because she had child support checks that covered everything. I hate to admit it, but I sometimes wonder if the only reason I wasn't kicked out earlier was because of that child support. If it weren't for the money coming in, I'm not sure how long I would have stayed in that house. It felt like my mother was just waiting for me to grow up and leave her alone so she could continue living her life. At the age of 13, things began to change when she started seeing Matt, my stepfather, who was 50 years old. Matt had a daughter, Jess, who was around my age. When my mother first introduced us, she told me to be on my best behavior because this relationship was apparently different from all the others. It was the first time my mother seemed to care about how I acted in front of her boyfriends. Matt and Jess soon started visiting frequently, and before long, it was clear that they were moving in together. My mother was making this relationship permanent. At first, I didn't mind, but the more they spent time together, the more I felt like I was being pushed aside. The moment I realized how serious my mother was about this relationship came when she told me I would have to share my room with Jess once they moved in together. I refused. My room was the only place I had control over, the only space that was truly mine in that house. When I told my mother I wouldn't share my room, we had a huge argument. She threatened to kick me out, but I knew she couldn't do that because I was underage. Despite that, she was persistent, and eventually, she converted the basement into a room for Jess. At first, I thought it wasn't too bad. The basement was a livable space, though not as nice as my room. But soon after Jess moved in, things started to get worse. She became hostile toward me. I didn't know why she hated me, but it seemed to be because I refused to share my room with her. Her behavior became increasingly mean. She would bully me, make fun of my appearance, and say cruel things. One time, she even told me that the reason my father left my mother was probably because of me. She laughed it off as if it were some funny joke, but I wasn't laughing. She made my life unbearable, and my mother, instead of standing up for me, sided with her. It wasn't just verbal abuse either. Jess had a group of friends who also bullied me, and my mother didn't care. She would compare me to Jess constantly, reinforcing the idea that Jess was the daughter she had always wanted. It was as if everything I did was wrong, and everything Jess did was perfect. I became more isolated, my self-esteem shattered, and my mental health deteriorated. My mother, who had never been very present, became even more distant. She would rather spend time with Jess and Matt than with me, and my existence in that house felt like a burden. When I turned 18, the situation came to a head. Jess had planted drugs in my room and accused me of using and selling them. My mother immediately sided with her, and I was kicked out of the house without any chance to explain myself. I had no choice but to leave. My parents didn't care. I had nowhere to go, and I was forced to sleep on my best friend's couch for a while. Despite all of this, I couldn't bring myself to hate them. I just had to move on. It took years for me to rebuild my life, but I did. I worked hard, went back to school, and eventually met someone who made me feel loved and accepted for the first time in my life. Jeff, my fiancé, was my rock, and I finally started to feel like I could have a future. But despite all of that, the past never fully left me. Jess's actions and my mother's betrayal still haunted me. I had to learn to forgive, but I couldn't forget. The trauma from those years with my mother and stepsister shaped who I am today. The scars are still there, but they are healing. I'm stronger, and I finally have the support I need. I never thought I would make it this far, but with Jeff by my side, I'm looking forward to a future that is mine to shape. Life hasn't always been kind to me, and the years I spent growing up felt like a constant struggle for acceptance and love. From the beginning, my parents' divorce marked the start of an emotional roller coaster. I was just 2 years old when my father walked out on us, and although he paid child support, he never showed any interest in my life. He was absent, both physically and emotionally, and I've never truly understood why he chose to leave. On the other hand, my mother, though still present, never provided the love or attention I needed. She was more focused on her social life than raising me. Her freelance career provided her financial independence, but her lack of parental involvement made it clear she wasn't interested in being a mother. By the time I was 13, my mother entered into a relationship with Matt, a man who was 50 years old and had a daughter named Jess, my soon-to-be stepsister. At first, I didn't think much of it. Matt's visits were polite, and he seemed like a decent person. However, as time went on, I began to realize that things were changing in ways I didn't expect. When my mother and Matt decided to make their relationship permanent, she announced that I would have to share my room with Jess. This wasn't just a simple request, it felt like an imposition. My room was my sanctuary, the only place where I felt safe and at peace. I refused to give it up, and that's when the tension started. My mother didn't take kindly to my refusal. She didn't seem to care that I had no other space in the house to call my own. She threatened to kick me out if I didn't comply. I was 14 at the time, and though I knew she couldn't legally throw me out, the emotional toll was crushing. Eventually, she moved Jess into the basement, but the damage was done. From that point on, Jess and I became enemies, and I became the scapegoat for all the issues in our household. Jess didn't take kindly to being relegated to the basement, and she took her resentment out on me. She was cruel, taunting me about my appearance, bullying me at school, and even making comments about how my father had left us because of me. It was like a constant barrage of verbal attacks that chipped away at my self-worth. My mother, instead of stepping in to protect me, sided with Jess. She compared me to her constantly, reinforcing the idea that Jess was the daughter she'd always wanted. I became invisible in my own home, a place that should have been a refuge. As the years went on, the tension between Jess and me grew. My mother and Matt turned a blind eye to Jess's behavior, dismissing it as just a phase. But for me, it was a constant source of pain. I tried to defend myself, but it was clear that I wasn't going to win in a household that favored Jess. The emotional toll of living with this toxic environment began to affect me in every area of my life. I gained weight, struggled with my self-image, and fell behind in school. The isolation I felt was suffocating, and it seemed like no one cared about my struggles. At 18, I was finally kicked out of the house. My mother, who had always been indifferent, suddenly became the agent of my downfall. Jess once again played the role of the instigator, and I was left with nowhere to go. I had no family to turn to, and I felt completely alone. But then, a glimmer of hope appeared when I turned to my best friend, Amy. She knew the pain I had endured and offered me a place to stay. Amy's family took me in without hesitation, offering me the support and love I had always longed for. Living with Amy's family was a turning point for me. I was able to attend community college and start working toward a future that felt possible. I spent the next few years rebuilding my life, focusing on my health, education, and personal growth. During that time, I met Jeff, and for the first time, I felt truly loved. Jeff wasn't like the men in my past. He was supportive, kind, and patient. He didn't just love me for who I was in the moment. He supported me as I worked to become the person I wanted to be. When Jeff proposed, I knew I had found the one person who would never let me down. We've been engaged for 2 months now, and while life has been good, the past still lingers in unexpected ways. Jess, after almost 8 years of silence, contacted me, apologizing for everything that had happened. But something felt off about it. I soon discovered that Jess's husband was involved in Jeff's family business, and I couldn't shake the feeling that her apology was more about her own interests than genuine remorse. Despite this, I felt a sense of vindication knowing that I had finally found peace. Although Jess and my mother continue to cause drama, I know I'm not alone anymore. I have Jeff, my rock, and I'm determined to move forward, leaving the past behind me. Growing up, I never had the kind of relationship with my mother that one would hope for. From an early age, I experienced a lack of affection and attention, as my mother was more focused on her social life and career than on raising me. When my parents divorced when I was only 2 years old, my father disappeared from my life completely, leaving me with no connection to him other than child support. This left me feeling abandoned and unwanted, and I struggled with that feeling throughout my childhood. My mother, who was only in her late 20s at the time, wasn't much of a mother either. She worked as a freelance artist and did well enough financially, but it was clear that she wasn't very interested in being a parent. She would often leave me in the care of nannies or babysitters while she went out with friends or on dates. It was a lonely and confusing time in my life, as I was constantly seeking attention and validation from a mother who seemed to have no time for me. By the time I turned 13, my mother began seeing a man named Matt, who had a daughter around my age. Her name was Jess, and she would soon become my stepsister. From the moment I met Matt and Jess, things began to change in ways I didn't fully understand. My mother started taking their relationship seriously, and I was expected to be on my best behavior. She wanted everything to be perfect, and I was suddenly thrust into a situation where I had to share my space, my life, and my home with people I barely knew. The tension began when my mother insisted that I share my room with Jess. I had no intention of doing so. That room was my sanctuary, the one place in the house where I felt safe and at peace. But when I refused to give up my space, my mother threatened to kick me out. I was only 14, and I knew she couldn't legally send me away, but the emotional stress was unbearable. She ended up converting the basement into Jess's room, and that was when things began to spiral out of control. Jess didn't take kindly to the situation. She began to treat me as an enemy, making cruel comments about my appearance and my personality. She would even make nasty remarks about my father, mocking the fact that he had left us when I was a child. As if that wasn't enough, she began bullying me at school, turning my classmates against me. Her cruelty seemed endless, and I felt completely alone in the world. My mother, instead of stepping in to protect me, sided with Jess, often comparing me to her and telling me that Jess was the daughter she had always wanted. I became invisible in my own home, and the emotional toll it took on me was immense. As time passed, the abuse continued. Jess would manipulate situations to make me look bad, and I became the scapegoat for all the problems in our household. I was constantly punished for things that weren't my fault, while Jess got away with everything. My mother and Matt turned a blind eye to the bullying, and I was left to deal with it on my own. The emotional abuse took a toll on my mental health, and I began to struggle with my weight, appearance, and grades. It felt like everything I did was wrong, and I couldn't escape the toxic environment at home. When I turned 18, I was finally kicked out. My mother, who had never shown any real love or care for me, became the one to push me out of the house. It was a relief to leave, but it was also terrifying. I had nowhere to go and no family to turn to. I was forced to rely on my best friend, Amy, who took me in without hesitation. Her family gave me the support and love I had been missing all my life. They helped me get back on my feet, and with their encouragement, I enrolled in community college and began working part-time. Over the next few years, I gradually rebuilt my life. I lost weight, gained confidence, and focused on my education. It was during this time that I met Jeff, and everything changed. Jeff was the person I had been waiting for. Someone who truly loved me and supported me through everything. He was kind, patient, and understanding, and he never judged me for my past. After a few years of dating, Jeff proposed, and I finally felt like I was on the path to happiness. However, just when things seemed perfect, Jess resurfaced in my life, sending me an email after 8 years of silence. She apologized for everything she had done, admitting that she had planted drugs in my room to get me kicked out. But as I started investigating, I realized that there was more to the story. Jess's husband was involved with Jeff's family business, and I soon learned that their company had been underperforming. Jess blamed me for the fallout, but I knew that this was just another form of manipulation. Despite the past, I was determined to move forward with my life and not let Jess or my mother disrupt my happiness. With Jeff by my side, I knew I had finally found the love and support I had always craved, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. Growing up, I never felt like I belonged in my own family. My parents divorced when I was just 2 years old, and my father abandoned us soon after. All he did was send child support payments, which were hardly a substitute for a loving presence in my life. My mother, who was only in her late 20s at the time, never seemed to fully embrace the role of a mother. She was often distracted, spending her time dating, socializing, and working as a freelance artist, while I was left to be raised by nannies and babysitters. She didn't seem to care much about me, and I began to feel invisible. As I got older, my mother's neglect only became more apparent. She didn't pay attention to my emotional needs, and I often found myself trying to cope with life on my own. Her lifestyle was focused on her social life, and I was more of an afterthought than a priority. I didn't understand why she couldn't see how much I needed her, and over the years, I grew increasingly frustrated with her indifference. At 13, things changed when my mother began dating Matt, a man she would eventually marry. Matt had a daughter around my age, Jess. When they first moved in together, I was expected to share my space with her, despite the fact that I had never been consulted on the matter. I didn't want to share my room, and when I refused, my mother threatened to kick me out. I was only 14, and I knew she couldn't legally make me leave, but the emotional toll it took on me was immense. Eventually, she converted the basement into a room for Jess, which was one of the first signs that I wasn't really wanted in the home. As the situation with Jess developed, things began to worsen. My mother started comparing me to her, and I could see how much she favored Jess over me. I was often belittled and criticized, while Jess got away with almost everything. She would make cruel remarks about me, such as mocking my appearance, and even blaming me for the divorce between my mother and father. It became clear that she despised me, and I never understood why. All I wanted was my own space and to be left alone, but instead, I was constantly made to feel like an outsider in my own home. The emotional abuse took a toll on me, and I began to struggle with my mental health. I was overweight, acne-prone, and my self-esteem plummeted as a result of the constant ridicule from both Jess and my mother. My grades suffered as well, and I started to feel like I would never be good enough. The house, which had once been my home, now felt like a prison. I was constantly at odds with my family, and there seemed to be no escape from the cruelty that surrounded me. When I turned 18, my mother finally followed through on her threat and kicked me out. I had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. It was the most painful experience of my life, but in a strange way, it was also a relief. I no longer had to live in that toxic environment, but the reality was that I was left completely alone. With no family to support me, I turned to my best friend Amy, who welcomed me into her home. Her parents were kind and generous, and they gave me the support I had been missing for so long. They encouraged me to focus on my education, and I enrolled in community college, where I began to rebuild my life. Over the next few years, I lost weight, gained confidence, and started to take control of my life. I met Jeff, who would become the love of my life. He was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: kind, patient, and understanding. He never judged me for my past, and we quickly became inseparable. Our relationship flourished, and after a few years of dating, Jeff proposed. However, just when everything seemed perfect, Jess reappeared in my life. She sent me an email apologizing for the way she had treated me in the past, but the timing felt off, especially after Jeff and I had gotten engaged. I soon discovered that Jess's husband was involved with Jeff's business and that their company was struggling. Jess blamed me for their troubles, but I knew the truth. I had no intention of letting my past with Jess interfere with my happiness, and I decided to move forward with my life, leaving the toxic influence of my family behind. Now, as I prepare to marry Jeff, I realize how far I've come. Despite everything I endured growing up, I've found love, happiness, and a sense of belonging with someone who truly cares about me. My future is bright, and I'm no longer defined by the pain of my past. Growing up, I always felt a sense of distance from my family. My parents divorced when I was just a toddler, and my father left without a second glance. While he sent child support, he was never emotionally involved in my life. My mother, though physically present, was emotionally absent. She was a young, social woman who spent more time on dates and at social gatherings than on raising me. I was mostly cared for by nannies and babysitters, and it quickly became clear that my mother's priorities didn't include me. As I got older, things didn't improve. My mother, though providing for me financially, was never really there when I needed her emotionally. Her focus was on her career as a freelance artist, and I became more of an afterthought. I often found myself alone, trying to make sense of life without any real guidance or support. When I was 13, my mother met Matt, a man who would soon become my stepfather. He had a daughter around my age, Jess. While I had no interest in getting close to them, my mother made it clear that this relationship was different from her previous ones, and that we all needed to get along. At first, things were tolerable. Matt and Jess visited frequently, but my life didn't change much. Jess would spend half of the month with her mother, so I was left to deal with my own issues. But then my mother made a decision that changed everything. She wanted me to share my room with Jess. I wasn't willing to do that. My room had always been my sanctuary, my place of peace in a home that had never truly been my own. When I refused, my mother gave me an ultimatum: either share the room or leave. I was 14 years old, and I understood the law well enough to know that she couldn't legally kick me out. But the emotional manipulation she used was clear. In the end, she converted the basement into Jess's room. This change marked the beginning of an intense rivalry between Jess and me. From that point on, Jess seemed determined to make my life miserable. She would often say hurtful things, mocking me for my appearance, calling me fat, and even blaming me for my father leaving my mother. She had a group of friends who joined in on the bullying, and my life became an unbearable series of insults and isolation. I tried to fight back at times, but it only escalated the situation, and my parents always sided with Jess. I was constantly punished, while Jess was treated like the golden child. As my teenage years continued, things worsened at home. My mother, who had always been distant, became even more critical, comparing me to Jess at every turn. It became clear that Jess was the daughter my mother had always wanted. I, on the other hand, felt like an unwanted burden. By the time I was 18, I was kicked out of the house, just as my mother had threatened. I had nowhere to go and no real support system. With no family willing to help, I turned to my best friend Amy, who welcomed me into her home without hesitation. Amy and her parents became my saving grace. They offered me the love and support I had never received from my own family. Amy's parents provided me with a stable environment where I could focus on rebuilding my life. I enrolled in community college, and over the next few years, I started to heal. I lost weight, regained my self-confidence, and began to see a future for myself outside of the toxic environment I had grown up in. Years later, I met Jeff, and he became my rock. He was kind, understanding, and loved me for who I was. Our relationship flourished, and after dating for a while, Jeff proposed. But just as everything seemed perfect, Jess reappeared in my life. She sent me an apology email, admitting to her past actions and attempting to make amends. But I soon discovered that Jess's husband was involved with Jeff's business. When their company began to struggle, Jess accused me of sabotaging them. However, I knew the real reason behind their business issues. I had no intention of letting my past with Jess ruin my future with Jeff, and together, we decided to move forward without allowing the toxic influence of my family to interfere. As I prepare for my wedding, I reflect on how far I've come. Despite everything I endured growing up, I have found love, happiness, and a sense of belonging with someone who truly cares for me. My past will always be a part of me, but it no longer defines me. I am looking forward to my future with Jeff, leaving behind the pain of my childhood and embracing the life we are building together. From a young age, I always had a sense that my family didn't understand or care for me the way I needed. My parents divorced when I was very young, and my father, though he sent child support, didn't play any significant role in my life. My mother, on the other hand, was physically present, but emotionally absent. She was young, vibrant, and more interested in her own social life than being a mother to me. I grew up mostly with nannies and babysitters, and I was left to navigate life without much guidance or affection from her. As I grew older, things didn't get much better. My mother was a freelance artist who made good money but was rarely around. She spent her time dating or socializing, leaving me to fend for myself emotionally. I was used to being on my own, and though I resented it, I had little choice but to cope. I always felt like an afterthought in my own home. She was never involved in my education or personal life. When I was around 13, my mother met Matt, and soon after, he moved in with us. He had a daughter, Jess, who was around my age. My mother was serious about her relationship with Matt, and she made it clear that Jess would be living with us. At first, I didn't think much of it. But when my mother insisted that I share my room with Jess, things started to fall apart. This was my space, the only part of the house where I had any peace or privacy. I didn't want to share it with someone I didn't know, especially not someone who would likely take away the little sanctuary I had left. When I refused, my mother became angry. She didn't understand why I wouldn't accommodate Jess. After a heated argument, she informed me that if I didn't agree to share my room, she would kick me out. At 14, I knew she couldn't legally force me to leave, but I could tell she didn't care. In the end, my mother gave in and turned the basement into Jess's room, but this only fueled the tension between Jess and me. From that point on, Jess seemed to hate me. She had a way of making my life miserable, often mocking my appearance and calling me names. She even went so far as to blame me for the reason my father left my mother. Her cruelty was relentless, and my mother did nothing to stop it. She preferred to see Jess as the perfect daughter while I became the problem. I was never good enough, and my mother made sure to remind me of that daily. She would criticize me for things that didn't matter, while Jess would get away with anything. By the time I turned 18, things at home had gotten unbearable. I was constantly being belittled, and my mother's indifference was crushing. When Jess and my mother ganged up on me, I was finally kicked out of the house. I had nowhere to go. With no family to support me, I turned to my best friend, Amy. Her family welcomed me with open arms and gave me the support I had never gotten at home. They were the ones who helped me through the hardest time in my life, giving me the chance to rebuild. I lived with Amy and her parents for several years while I attended community college. Amy's family never pressured me to leave, and they helped me regain my confidence and sense of self-worth. Eventually, I was able to move out, get a job, and start living on my own. But the real turning point came when I met Jeff. He became my rock, my soulmate. After years of struggling with family rejection and isolation, Jeff showed me what real love and support looked like. Our relationship blossomed, and after a while, we got engaged. Just when things seemed perfect, Jess reappeared. She sent me an email apologizing for her actions, admitting she had planted things in my room to get me kicked out. But the timing of her email seemed suspicious. I later discovered that Jess's husband was involved in Jeff's business, and when their company began to lose clients, Jess accused me of sabotaging them. Jeff and I didn't let her accusations break us. Instead, we handled it professionally and legally, filing defamation charges. It became clear to me that no matter what Jess or my mother did, I had built a life that was strong enough to withstand their toxicity. The love and support I now have with Jeff is something I never thought I'd experience. As I prepare for my wedding, I realize that while my past shaped me, it no longer controls my future. I have learned to leave the past behind and look forward to the life ahead with the person I love. Throughout my life, I always felt like I was treated differently by my family, especially when it came to my father. He was emotionally distant, and though he financially supported us, he never showed any interest in my personal growth. I grew up with my mother who, to be honest, wasn't much of a mother figure either. She was young, social, and spent more time going out with friends and dating than actually caring for me. I was raised mostly by nannies and babysitters, and this lack of emotional connection left a mark on me. I often felt like I was a burden to my mom, someone she was just waiting to get out of the house so she could live her life freely. Things became more complicated when my mom remarried. She met Matt, a man who had a daughter, Jess, my new stepsister. At first, it wasn't too bad. We were strangers, but over time, Jess started becoming more familiar. When Matt and my mom decided to move in together, my mom made it clear that Jess would be sharing my room. I was already a teenager and had my own space, my own privacy, and this sudden shift really threw me off. I wasn't close to Jess, and the idea of sharing my personal space with her made me uncomfortable. This small request led to bigger arguments with my mom, and soon I found myself stuck between the demands of my new family and my own need for independence. The situation worsened after I refused to share my room. My mom, instead of understanding, sided with Jess. She decided to convert the basement into Jess's room, which only made Jess resent me more. I never understood why my mother made such an issue out of a simple preference. But from that point on, Jess treated me like an enemy. She bullied me, calling me names, mocking my appearance, and even blaming me for my father leaving. Her cruelty seemed to know no bounds, and it was clear that my mother, instead of standing up for me, sided with her. The years that followed were a blur of torment. My mother grew increasingly irritable and compared me to Jess constantly. It became apparent that Jess was the daughter she had always hoped for, and I was just an inconvenience in her life. Every mistake I made was exaggerated, and I was always blamed for things I didn't do. My mother's favoritism towards Jess pushed me to a breaking point. It wasn't just the bullying at home. Jess's influence extended beyond our house. She had managed to turn many people at school against me. The isolation I felt was suffocating. I was labeled as the problem, and no one ever questioned Jess's behavior. By the time I was 18, I was relieved when I was finally kicked out. It felt like I had been living under constant emotional pressure, and being forced to leave was almost a form of liberation. I had nowhere to go, no support system, but I managed to stay with my friend Amy for a while. Amy and her family became my rock. They welcomed me with open arms, and with their help, I slowly started to rebuild my life. I attended community college, got a job, and began to regain my confidence. Amy's family was always there for me, showing me what it meant to be cared for and supported. I had never experienced that kind of love before, and it meant the world to me. As time passed, I started to heal. I focused on myself, improved my health, and eventually met someone who truly understood me. Jeff became that person. We quickly connected, and over time, he became my soulmate. When he proposed, I was overjoyed. Finally, I was with someone who loved me for who I was and accepted me without conditions. But just as everything was falling into place, my past reared its ugly head. Jess contacted me after years of silence, apologizing for everything she had done. She admitted to planting things in my room to get me kicked out of the house. The timing of her message seemed off, especially after I announced my engagement. I soon learned that her husband worked with Jeff's family business, and when business dealings went sour, Jess blamed me. She posted angry accusations on social media, causing a stir. Despite everything, Jeff and I decided to handle it professionally, taking legal action for defamation. I realized that no matter what Jess or my mother did, I had the strength to move forward and focus on the happiness that I had finally found with Jeff. In life, we often face challenges that test our strength and character, especially when it comes to family dynamics. This story highlights the importance of self-worth, resilience, and the courage to stand up for ourselves, even when those we love may not always support us. The protagonist's journey teaches us that it's okay to distance ourselves from toxic relationships, even when they come from within our own families. Sometimes, the most important relationship we need to nurture is the one with ourselves. As we age, it becomes more crucial to prioritize our well-being and happiness, letting go of past hurts that no longer serve us. This lesson is particularly important for older individuals who may have spent years in difficult family dynamics, and it encourages us to surround ourselves with positive, supportive people who lift us up. The power to heal and move forward lies within us, and sometimes, the hardest yet most rewarding decision is choosing peace and love for ourselves, regardless of others' actions. Let go of bitterness and embrace the joy of living authentically, for it's never too late to find happiness and build a life that reflects who we truly are. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We hope you enjoyed this Reddit story as much as we did. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Silent Wars, for more amazing content. We'll see you in the next video.